opportunity, and thank you for the invite. My name is Matimba. I am an IT risk practitioner. I've been doing this for the past 10 years or so. So I started my career as an IT auditor for Sizwe Nsaluba Gobodo, often referred as to policemen and policewomen. So I would like to dismiss that myth because it's not true. And I'm going to be talking about effective risk management, and I'll put in context why I say risk management is not policing. So after completing my CISA, I then went to Standard Bank as an IT audit manager. I was there for 5 years, and I had an opportunity to work with different countries, including Lesotho, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and I got bored a little bit, and I thought, what can I do next with my life? And I then decided to move to first line risk. But it takes a process to do that, so I decided to do C-risk, which is more risk specific. After doing that, I then left for Bayport Financial Services to be an IT audit manager. I later became a head of IT audit manager. And what was very interesting in my time there was that my manager or my boss was not a tech person. And sometimes I got too excited, and I'll go to her and I say, look at this. I mean, look at a fridge that can talk to human, you know. Imagine a fridge telling you on your way home that the milk has expired. You need to pass by a store and get milk. And I think most of the speakers here have been talking about that in terms of artificial intelligence, robotics, and so forth. And it's a risk living in South Africa at the moment because we also have not shedding. So in any case, we probably anticipated that this will happen, and we will carry on as usual because we risk averse. So after that, and at Bayport Financial Services, I had an opportunity to work with different countries again, and put things in context and connect the dots. And I got to work with countries such as Colombia, Mexico, and then back into the Africa regions, Ghana, Zambia, and so forth. So with everything that we do, right, there's always a risk. And I'm convinced, you know, just before last week, I wasn't so convinced, but I am now convinced because I went to a petrol station. I'm not gonna mention them to protect their reputation. So I usually don't check. I'll say I need this much petrol or diesel, and then I'll look away, and then I'll let the petrol attendant do their job. So after just a minute or so, the petrol attendant comes back to me, and I actually told them twice that it's diesel, and when they open the lid, it says diesel. My car says diesel, and then when you're about to put the petrol pump, it also says diesel. But for some reason, and I forgave him for that because it's an error, it's a mistake, it's a human error. He put petrol, and you know, I started looking at this, and I'm thinking, 4 times, diesel, but still, he managed to put petrol. And the reason why I say I'm convinced is that, you know what, the people that designed cars actually thought about this to say, if a car is contaminated, these are the possibilities, this is what we can do. And there's nothing that cannot be fixed, including risk. So what happened is that, long story short, I took it to Ford and they fixed it for me. And yeah, that's the long story short. And the speakers that came before me talked about Chat GPT. So in March this year, and believe you me, I didn't edit this or, So in March this year, I asked Chat GPT, I said, what is the future of risk? And I won't say surprisingly, but increased reliance on technology came first. So we're more and more relying on technology. It simplifies our lives. It makes it convenient. However, there's a risk attached to it. My presentation is going to cover the why and the how of risk management. What is effective risk management? The 4 lines of defense, the risk management process, typical risk mitigation strategies, common digital risk and mitigation strategies. But whilst I was sitting there and other people were presenting, I thought, look, judging by the audience, right? I anticipated that I'll be talking to a diverse audience coming from different industries and different backgrounds. So I decided to make it generic. So the presentation is generic. It's not something that you can take and go and apply as is to your organization, because it has to be specific. It has to be relevant. So let's start with the definition of what is effective risk management. So it's a continuous monitoring process. It's not a once-off, and you have to look at incidents. You have to look at changes. You have to look at the industry itself. You have to look outside what is happening, what is topical, what is trending, so that you can respond. It's proactive in nature. So instead of waiting for things to happen, we anticipate what could go wrong, what can happen, so that we can respond as quickly as we can. And my apologies, I'm displaying the wrong slide. So I'm talking to this. So it also understands the industry landscape, including customer needs, and I think most of my colleagues that spoke before me emphasized this point. So you have to take your customer into account as you design your products, as you innovate, as you move forward, so that you can address their needs and what is risk to them. It is also proactive. It is data-driven. It is customer and business-driven. So I'm talking specific here, tech risk, but it has to be customer and business-driven, because before technology, the business was there. It was probably manual processes that we're automating, and we're using robotics and artificial intelligence. So and why do we do risk? Why do we do risk management? Is to work with management to set the tone for a proactive risk culture, to minimize losses and maximize profits, to be risk conscious, to take risk with our eyes wide open, to anticipate and respond to disasters. And also to recommend controls to mitigate risks. I'm going to move on to before I move on, are there any questions so far? No questions. For risk management to be effective, it has to have the right structures. Right? So it must have the right structures. And I'm going to talk about the 4 lines of defense for effective risk management. So it starts at the top. It's a top-down approach. The board of directors sets the tone for a proactive risk culture. Executive management, it's a collaborative effort between business and IT. They develop the strategy. Line management and first line management implements and monitors controls. Second line risk provides guidelines and assurance, and also provide independent assurance. So this is our colleagues in the risk space. We also have the third line of defense, which is internal audit. So internal audit is independent, and they provide assurance on controls. Last but not least, we have the fourth line of defense, which is external audits, which also provides assurance on risks and controls. For a risk management process to be effective, it requires an effective process. So that means that we start with risk identification and assessment. And I've been doing this for a long time. But what I realized is that we used to do RCA, so risk control self-assessment, and then we say we've identified the risk, we've tested the controls, are they adequate or effective? But then with the new technology and the implementation of robotics and artificial intelligence, we also have to flip that traditional way of doing things and start looking at incident trending and analysis for continuous monitoring. So if you're having incidents that relates to capacity planning and monitoring, human errors, that's a risk in itself. So you need to respond accordingly in terms of implementing controls. We look at change trending and analysis, avoidable incidents, human errors, whether the change management process is adequate enough. Are we doing adequate testing? Do we have the different environments, dev, test? Do we test properly? Do we have the implementation plan? Do we have the rollback plan? So all of those things we look even before we get to the environment. We also do themes from internal and external audit. So we look at what internal audit is looking at and what they're raising, what are the concerns, what are the findings around that. And we theme them and we say internal audit is worried about privileged access management. They're worried about capacity planning and monitoring. They're worried about backup and restorations. Is that a problem? What can we do about it? So it's more a proactive risk management process. We also look at performing business unit risk assessment. So we work with management to review the environment in terms of what is risk and what is topical. That includes establishing the likelihood and consequences, recommending controls, because with everything, as I mentioned before, inherently there's a risk. Taking into account the controls, we then rate the residual risk and what we do about it, which I'm going to talk about in a while. We also have risk assurance and mitigation, and I'm going to talk quickly to this. And I'm responsible for this where I am currently employed. We develop an assurance plan, which is data-driven, looking at IT incidents, looking at changes. And when I started in my role, there were a lot of problems, right? There were a lot of problems, and I thought, are they patching? Are they doing backups? Are they doing capacity planning and monitoring? But at that point in time, the biggest thing for us was availability of systems. So even if you went to the CIO and said 2 out of 20 machines are not being patched, they're probably thinking that's a smaller problem for me. So we have to be, with everything that we do from a risk perspective, we have to be current, and we have to be relevant. So we develop an assurance plan that is data-driven, identify and test control environment. This is where now your innovation, your robotics and artificial intelligence comes in, because it has to be real-time monitoring of controls. You can imagine we've got over 100, over thousands IT controls, which if we have to send one person to go and test, it probably takes them forever to complete. We also implement continuous monitoring, including incident training and predictive analysis. I spoke to this earlier. Risk control assessments, looking at audit plans, upcoming audits. We don't wait for audit to tell us your change control process is crap. Your capacity planning and monitoring process is inadequate and ineffective. So we do this before they come. We also review, in the event that they raise findings, we don't discard them. We look at the themes around that, and we track. We also look at change management, because as I mentioned, we had a challenge with availability of systems, and we had to look at it from a change management perspective to say, what are the top talkers, what are the avoidable incidents that we can already eliminate. With that said, we also have risk reporting, and what makes the process more effective is that we need to embed risk management in everything that we do, in all the processes that we do. So we integrate risk discussions in daily, weekly, and monthly stand-ups. So most IT people have daily, weekly, and monthly stand-up. Risk is a standing item in most of those meetings. We also run risk forums within business units by risk managers, risk and compliance committees for business units, risk and compliance committees for the group. And from what I've seen, it's robust and constructive discussions. And it has to be like that, because with risk, you cannot be buddy-buddy. We have to talk about risk. We have to be straightforward. We have to be honest about it. And now that brings me to what I came here for, which is typical risk mitigation strategy. So with everything that we do, from a risk identification and assessment perspective to risk reporting, we then get to a point where we decide, based on the inherent risk, what the mitigation strategy will be. So we can either mitigate, transfer, avoid, or accept, right? So if the risk is high and the impact is also high, at the end, we have no choice but to mitigate. In the event that we don't have the skills or the resources, we can choose to transfer to a third-party provider, or we can take insurance. If the risk is low and the impact is low, we can avoid or accept. So we don't accept because we can, we accept because the risk is low and the impact is also low. Okay, so to make it relevant, I thought, let me include some of the common themes that talks to what we're talking about today, which is digital finance. So as we digitize, as we innovate, as we implement, obviously it simplifies our lives, but it also brings risk with it. So what I've seen is the biggest thing for me is business disruption risk. So there's no use for us to have all this technology and it's hardly available. So in the event that, for me personally, in the event that I'm using a certain product and it's always unavailable, I'll choose to leave, or I'll choose to use something else. And the common denominator for all this is financial loss and reputational damage. So with, I think one of the speakers talked about trust, which is very important, and it is linked to reputational damage. Fraud risk, top of mind for business, for customers. We also work with third-party providers. We use networks, we use software, Microsoft, IBM, and stuff. So we also have to check and ensure that they have mitigated, they've thought about risk and they've mitigated, so that they don't impact us. We also have information and cyber risk, and the panel did a very good job in explaining what cyber risk is and how we can mitigate. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. We also have regulatory compliance, example being your POPIA, protection of personal information, anti-money laundering, exchange control. So it's very important to take this in mind as we innovate and implement. Also very important is the execution and the strategic initiative. So most times what I've seen is someone mentioned executive management, so senior executive management going to the golf course and creating a creative environment. But that also comes with the risk, because in the past what we used to see is executives used to travel and they see something in the UK and the US and they get inspired and think, oh, this might work for my organization, but it does not always work, right? So in the UK and the US, I could have refueled my car. I could have made the same mistake in terms of putting petrol instead of diesel, but they already doing that in the UK and the US. And what also stood out for me is the competition risk. So with all this innovation and new companies coming up, there's competition. And with competition, you don't have to do something to be taken out of business. Because when Nokia was being replaced in a way by BlackBerry, the CEO at the time had to make a speech. And at the end, he says, we didn't do anything wrong, but we still lost. So it's very important for us to innovate with competition and futuristic type of thinking in mind. Last but not least is other mitigation strategies. So in the event that we don't have the resources, we can also go with insurance coverage, and we also have to apply stronger cybersecurity measures, which the panel did a very good job in explaining what it is and how we can go about. That's me in a nutshell. Any questions? Please go.
Is there any proactive strategies that you are aware of that actively adopt AI in governing cyber risk in general? So the question, I want to understand whether there's strategies around, well, cybersecurity typically is a very traditional thing, so the evolution of it and the growth of it, is there active strategies in applying insights or AI in addressing that?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, and it's something that I take great interest in. An example of that is, especially with most financial services, right? So if you perform a transaction, they usually call you to say, is this you? And what that is doing is they looking at your patterns, and it's artificial intelligence, it's robotics in a way, because it looks at your patterns and say, but Mr. So-and-so, Ms. So-and-so, you hardly perform transactions or execute transactions outside of the country or in a specific or a different location, right? Is this you? That for me is an example of how we can use AI to proactively monitor and prevent fraud. What we're also doing is, from a data and IA perspective, is to look at incidents. And we had an unfortunate incident, and it was because it was busy, it was peak period, right? So we look at peak periods and say, what is likely to go wrong, you know, in terms of our availability or system availability, and what we can do. So it's something that is developing. It's something that is new from where I'm coming from, but we are very much into artificial intelligence and robotics to make sure that we are real-time monitoring. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Any other questions? On that note, oh, okay, sorry, my apologies. Please go.
Hi, my name is Bianca from Access Forex. My question is, what sort of risks have you encountered in terms of integrations, especially in terms of the IT API integrations? I know a lot of talk is around API integration, so what sort of risks can you just highlight there?
So with any integration, the inherent risk is around availability of systems, and I saw a number of times where the integration fails, and then there is downstream impact in terms of system or service availability. With APIs, to be specific, we recently started using APIs, so we haven't really audited or looked at risk from an API perspective. So I might wanna invite the audience to help me with this one. But with any other integration, my concern is always around availability. And making sure that whatever is being integrated is complete, accurate, and the integrity around data. Are there any views, colleagues?
Yeah, I'm just going to say the integrity of the data.
Okay. Yeah, right. Any other questions? It's an interesting topic, so I would imagine that there's so many questions around risk and what can go wrong. So I take it I addressed all the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.